Commissaire is a lightweight REST interface for upgrading, restarting, and bootstrapping new hosts into an existing container management cluster, such as OpenShift or Kubernetes. This video is intended to show you how you can use the current features available in our master branch. But please note that Commissaire is still a very young project, and it is not recommended for production use just yet. First, let's take a look at the services we have running and the configuration files we'll be using with Commissaire. For this demo, we'll be using Kubernetes as the container manager. And as you can see, it's currently running and has no active nodes. We also have etcd running. This is where Commissaire will be storing its internal data. It is important to note that we have a flannel configuration already set up. For instructions on how to do this yourself, please see the Getting Started guide at projectatomic.io. Now let's take a quick look at the server configuration. As you can see, we have a couple URIs here, the first being for etcd, the next being for Kubernetes. And for authentication, we're using the basic authentication plugin and defining one user with a password of A, and that's a bcrypt hash there. Now let's take a quick look at the commctl configuration file. Here you'll notice we have a username and password, the same things that were defined earlier. If we didn't have the password, it would prompt for it. And then we have two endpoints here, even though we only really need one because we're only going to be using one. By having multiple endpoints defined, commctl will try the next server in line if there's a problem with the previous one. Next, let's look at the Commissaire server command. As you can see, there's quite a few switches available. These can also be set in a configuration file, which we'll be using shortly. So let's go ahead and start the Commissaire server using the configuration file we looked at earlier. As you can see, it started up successfully, gave us a lot of log information. So let's go ahead and move over to commctl. Here we'll find many different subcommands that we can use when interacting with the Commissaire server. Let's verify we don't have any clusters currently defined. And let's do the same thing with hosts to make sure that we have no hosts defined. Now let's define a new cluster and call it Data Center 1. It's been created, so let's verify by listing, and it comes up in the list. We can also get the cluster, which will give us some basic health information. Now let's manually add a new host node to the cluster. And when adding the new host node, let's make sure it's in the Data Center 1 cluster. Next, we put in the IP address for the host. And lastly, we add the host's key for access. The result here is that the host is now in the investigating state, which means that it's going to take a look at the host and start bootstrapping it to make sure it'll work well in the container manager, which again, for our use today, is Kubernetes. In many cases, when you bootstrap nodes like this, you probably will do it through your cloud provider. In doing so, you can use our cloud init configuration. That way, when you provision new hosts, they'll automatically register with the Commissaire server and eventually make their way into Kubernetes or whatever container manager you use. Now let's take a look at the host node's record. We'll do this through commctl. So as you can see, we're just going to use a host get and the IP address, and now we have some information back. And it is active, which means it should be connected up with Kubernetes now. So let's go ahead and take a look at that as well. And there we go. It is connected and it's ready to take on pods. And since Commissaire is holding on to the SSH keys after bootstrapping, we created the host SSH command, which will allow you to SSH into any of your nodes by temporarily getting the username and key from the Commissaire server. You can also add in SSH flags at the very end of the command. And of course, Commissaire is open source. It is licensed under the GPL v3. So come get involved, and thanks for watching.